Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for Identiv's October webinar. For those of you whom I haven't met in person yet, my name is Charlie Schumacher, and I'm part of the IR team for Identiv. Today's presentation will follow a similar structure to the webinar we held at the end of June. We'll be starting with a brief overview of Identiv's business, so those of you less familiar have more context for today's discussion. That overview will be followed by product demonstrations, and then we'll open the webinar for your questions. If you do have any questions during the presentation, please submit them to the Q&A portal, and we'll be sure to address as many as we can, time permitting. However, please do bear in mind that with earnings around the corner, we do plan to keep today's discussion focused more on Identiv solutions and the recent changes in the company's industry, as opposed to updates on the third quarter specifically. I believe most of you know our presenters, but by way of introduction, they are Steve Humphries, CEO of Identiv, and Mark Allen, General Manager of Premises. Steve has been CEO of Identiv since 2015, and he has served on the board of directors since 1996. He has over 3 decades of experience leading security technology companies that specialize in government-grade logical and physical access control, secure credentials and digital identity solutions, and RFID and mobile app software. Mark, who will again be joining Steve for today's demos, has been with Identiv since 2003. He's a technologist whose 29 years of experience in tech startups and public companies has led him to his current role as the general manager of Premises. With that covered, I'm going to turn the call over to Steve to kick things off. Steve?
All right, thanks, Charlie. And thank you all for joining us. We do these quick demo briefings really to add to the financials and the business commentary that we do each quarter, in the investor meetings that we have in between. But the question that often comes up is, how big is the opportunity that you've got in front of us? How many units? How do we quantify this? When is it happening? And why is Identiv going to hold its leadership position and benefit from the big growth opportunities here? And so, of course, a lot of it is in the results and the numbers and the projections, but really, hopefully, it helps to see the products themselves and get a sense of the use cases and then the real market opportunity and how that market opportunity is going to scale through those specific use cases. So investors can actually conceptualize, what we're doing. More importantly, how our technology being used by the companies that are driving the industry, and why this is truly a multi-billion unit market with a growing, and rapidly expanding a set of use cases that will be driving accelerating growth in that space and up to those numbers. And that it's not us saying those numbers, but they're connected with the actual applications, some of which we'll be showing you today. And then why physical and cyber are converging with RFID to create this software-enabled platform that we believe is going to be very pervasive and really be sustaining the growth going forward as virtually as far as we can see. So as Charlie mentioned, we'll talk about our third quarter results on the third quarter earnings call. We are in the quiet period here, so we can't comment on those. But we already indicated the level of growth that we have. We indicated a total year growth in RFID of 80% year over year. We indicated that we expect RFID in this third, fourth quarter timeframe to be nearly double what it was last year. So those are all things we'd said before. The underlying trends that are driving that are much broader than we are. Those of you who saw Apple's announcement last week, iOS 14 we've been talking about, and that really came out almost a month ago. But things like the MagSafe platform and ecosystem of connected devices is really core to Apple's strategy, and NFC and devices like ours are obviously intimately involved in platforms like that. And that's what's really driving the billions of market expansion. So we'll talk about that later, and we can certainly go into Q&A. But it's the inflection points that are really resulting in our growth. So just to give you a few examples of that, today we've got 3 demos. One in the RFID space, which is CVS's spoken prescription app. The second one in the cyberspace, which is our recently launched FIDO keys. And in physical security, Mark will be talking about our Freedom Cloud Web and Bridge application, really the trend that's going on in physical security of the reduction in the hardware platform and footprint, and the expansion of recurring revenues and software in that space. So to start off with spoken prescription, is an app. It's publicly known. It's visible from CVS, so you can go into the CVS pharmacy app. It's available in about 1,500 of their pharmacies right now, and in the app they have something called Spoken RX. And with their prescriptions, if you enroll as visually impaired, they have an RFID tag on the bottom of the prescription then that you get. To put it in context, about 13% of their users, of their prescriptions are prescribed to people who are visually impaired. There's about 4.5 billion prescriptions filled each year in the US. So you can do the math, that's over 500 million units a year. And obviously this is a recurring basis because when people finish their prescriptions, they throw them away and they get a new tag on it. So I've gone ahead and enrolled here. So this is true, commercial availability, off you go. So it's a little bit hard to do a mobile demo on the phone, but it's simple as that. Right, and then you just put it up.
Ezetimibe 10 milligrams tablet for Stephen Humphreys. Directions for use. Take one tap by mouth.
So you can hear very simple how that works, and it probably went so fast you barely even noticed it. I opened the app and it said ready to scan. You take it, tap it to your iPhone. Now that the iPhones, especially with iOS 14, are fully NFC enabled, you see how fast it is. In fact, I could have done it just without even the app open now because NFC data exchange format's enabled. You tap it to the back, it opens the app and goes straight into that. So if you're visually impaired, and whether or not you're, when people hear visually impaired, they sometimes think blind. It's actually just people who can't read so well. And on the prescription bottle, this is the text that you've got there. So they're actually expecting once a lot of people start to use it, it can go to a broad range of largely eyeglass wearing people who late at night, you might not want to put your glasses back on, you just tap it, you know what it is. So you can immediately see the number of use cases there. I mentioned 500 million prescriptions a year, 500 million tags. But also what's important now is that you get extensions on top of this, and you can imagine other use cases for the visually impaired. Obviously virtually anything that you need to interact with by reading something is now enabled with a tag. And the difference if you're a product manager who's serving the visually impaired community in the past was if you launched a product that was NFC based, you'd say anybody with an Android phone can use this. That's really not an acceptable use case for virtually anybody. Now anybody with a smartphone can use it. You tap it, you go, it's frictionless. You could also think of other use cases now that aren't just visually impaired. You always get niche markets like that to launch a new technology like this. But a lot of folks, for example, if you've got a few prescriptions and you've got to take them a couple of times a day, sometimes you don't remember, did I take that in the morning? Did I take it at night? So if you could just tap your phone every time you're taking a prescription, then you would remember, okay, I already took this. If you tap it and it says you already taken it this morning, or you've taken your dosage for this morning, all those 4.5 billion prescriptions really should have some additional enablement here. You could be counting down how many you're using the pill, and then instead of the sort of random month prescription refill that a lot of us get, you could be really directly connected to your consumption patterns. You could take it beyond prescriptions as well, as you can imagine, because same thing. How many Tylenol have I taken today? A lot of us have had that experience. And am I reaching the limit for 24 hours? If I just tap my phone each time, it would be telling me you've reached the limit of what you should take today. Or if you're taking an over-the-counter drug for a prescribed condition, aspirin, things like that, have you taken the right amount during the day? So there's a range of use cases, and if it gets associated with just visually impaired, that's 500 million annually recurring. If it gets associated with all the prescriptions, that's 4.5 billion annually recurring. If it gets associated with over-the-counter drugs, now I won't even give you a number on that because who knows which over-the-counter will be appropriate for it, but you can imagine it's a factor of 10 on top of the number of pharmacy prescriptions. And all these numbers are just the US. And in any of these cases, you think in terms of 25% of the global market, so you can quadruple any of those numbers. That's why we're so excited about RFID, and that's why we think it's starting to take off, because now it's enabled. Every single one of the devices that everybody has in their hands can tap and use one of these tags. And now product managers are starting to think of the ways they can use it and launch it real time. And CVS Spoken Prescription is just one of those. So just wanted to give you that as a live demonstration. Any of you can do this as well, enroll in CVS. I was actually pretty surprised it's nominally in pilot right now, but my local pharmacy was all set up for it, and was very straightforward. So that really is what we wanted to show in the RFID space. We could go on and on about RFID applications, of course. In fact, one of these sessions we may just dedicate to RFID applications, but that is, of course, a very hard act to follow. But I do want to go into another one of our products, which we just launched recently, which is our FIDO keys. And in this case, I'm now moving over into cybersecurity from the RFID space. But again, you'll see there's an NFC chip and capability in the same FIDO key. It's the same technology we're using. FIDO stands for Fast Identity Online. It's a standard that Google, Microsoft, Facebook, Twitter, a number of others have adopted and is used across the board. And the issue is typing in passwords on every website is an aggravation, and people start to use simple passwords or reuse the same one. With the FIDO key, you put all your passwords on the key, you touch it to make sure that you're in fact present with that where that key is, and that launches it. So let me just give you a use case. There's two use cases you can do with it. One is two-factor authentication. And we're seeing a lot of interest in two-factor authentication growing as we get work from home. And I'll talk about that in a minute when I finish the demos. But here it's very simple. On my Android phone, I've got my my Google login. You do the normal login where you just put in your password. But I am now set up that it's going to ask for a second factor. And all I do is I take this little guy and touch it to the back of it. And if I'm not touching the screen, it'll just pop up and say, okay, now you're authenticated. Very easy. And that was an NFC transaction, a secure encrypted NFC transaction that transferred a one-time password to my Google account and allowed me to log in. And in the spirit of time, what the heck, we'll go really quickly into this, and I'll show you just on your Google account online, you can do the exact same thing. Let me just show you how it's used, because it is useful to see this. So hopefully you all can see the screen. This is my personal account I'm using, so there's no company information disclosed. And so now it's saying, tap or insert your USB key into the port, and you put it into your USB port, and you can hear it in, there. And now what it's asking is, okay, that's great. We see that the device is in there. Touch it, so I'm confirming that a human being is there, and I touch it, and off we go. We're all set. So that is, that's exactly how you log into your website. And that's the two-factor authentication. So I'm going to talk a little bit about security here and why that is more relevant than ever. It's because there is a huge growth happening in phishing attacks and in people using their mobile devices and their home devices for business purposes. And it's not being written about a ton, but it is in the security spaces, and we're hearing it from our especially federal customers and high-end commercial customers like the banking industry and healthcare. And the breaches are really expanding dramatically. And so the FIDO key is right in line with our smart card readers. It's just a little more frictionless because you don't have to have a reader and you put your ID card in it. You can simply take a FIDO key, either tap it for an NFC transaction or set it in and touch it, as you saw there. That's what I really wanted to show you, is something that is very well aligned with work from home and mobility. And that is very well aligned with our mission around making very secure, but also frictionless, easy to adopt and deploy, and our underlying technology of NFC that we're leveraging in multiple use cases, whether on the RFID side or on the crypto security side. So I'll stop with those two demos. Let me turn it over to Mark, and he's going to take you through some of our physical security capabilities that we've launched and are launching right now.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate that. Yeah, guys, thanks for having us and spending the time with us. Steve mentioned that I'm going to talk about some of the trends that are happening in access control. And to get to the really exciting thing that is happening in our industry, I have to talk a little about where we came from. So excuse me while I move my monitor and show you a little bit about where we came from. I'll try and stay in view as well. So this is a traditional access control panel that's been installed inside buildings now for the past 20 or 30 years. It's still being installed in buildings. It is a long-standing access control product, and it's grown over many, many years. I'll explain some of the components on there just to get an idea of what actually goes with an access control solution. It usually comes with a power supply. So in the bottom corner here, you've got 110 coming in from the wall to power the panel. This transforms that down to 24 volts because typically access control is a low voltage system. It usually comes with a battery. The reason why for the battery is in an event of a power outage, the battery can continue to run your doors so that people can still exit the building and come into the building while there's any outage in power. You'll see that it's got a fairly large PCB inside of here. This panel is an 8-door panel. Very typical to see 8-door panels. Those higher density type panels are typical. These things get installed inside closets. So they're centrally located, and then you do long wire runs from each one of these door connectors out to the readers out by the door, and that's where the installers will run wiring from the panel out to the door. They'll wire up a reader, they'll wire up a lock, and then a card will be placed in front of a reader, and then this thing decides whether the person can get through the door. This is connected to some software, usually a client-server type architecture. And that client-server architecture is where you update badge holders and you update door groups and time zones that people can come through doors at a certain time. You can see there's a lot of infrastructure in place to actually open the door, a lot of expensive infrastructure. And also this requires quite a bit of space inside of a closet hanging on a wall. As time has gone on, wall space has become very rare, and it's hard to get a hold of. So we've started to move towards an edge controller. And I've got an example of an edge controller, still based on some legacy type hardware. This is an MX1, it's a 1-door controller. It's basically all of the components that are on this 8-door controller have been removed, so you only have enough components for 1 door. It's put into a device that's a bit more easy to manage, a bit more easy to move around, and it reduces the long wire runs. So this product usually gets installed above the door, usually on the secure side of the door. The readers are wired into the connectors here, so you have a short run from above the door down to a reader, and then it gets connected via power over a PoE connector. So it gets its power from an alternative source, usually a PoE switch that's in an IT closet somewhere. So this is the first kind of try that the industry has had to disperse the hardware, free up some space in the closets, and basically have a go at an edge technology. Where we're seeing it go, though, is really an evolution, and that's why I'm going to move my camera one more time. I apologize for this. We'll see if we can get it to connect onto the product. There we go. So what you see here is what we believe is the evolution of the access control panel. I've got a control over here. It's let's see if I can get it better in the camera here. It's a 2-inch by 3-inch panel PCB. It's powered by power over Ethernet, so it doesn't need a power supply. It doesn't need a battery. You'll also notice it doesn't have a lot of the components that were on the original controller. So it's significantly less cost to manufacture. But what it does is really important. It takes a reader input, which by the way is being powered by the PoE, so there's no extra power supply need to be run for this product to support powering the reader. It takes any reader input in the form of a card, and I'll run my card over here to show you that it's working. It'll take that input, it will read it through the reader input, it'll encrypt it, and it'll send it to the head end. And this is where the head end, there's lots of options on where you can put the head end. The ideal solution for the head end is to move it to the cloud, move it into an AWS or an Azure type solution. That way you have accessibility to your solution from pretty much anywhere in the world. And basically the head end is the thing that's making the decisions to decide whether I can get through the door. Meaning that there's no need now to have large amounts of memory and CPU and processing power at the controller's edge, because all of that is now being moved to the cloud. So a huge advantage over your client server and hardware installed products versus where we see the industry going today. The hardware advantages are pretty easy to see, because you can see that it's a small device, simple to find a spot for that. Not needing power because it's pulling it from the switch. What it's doing from a hardware standpoint, it's really leveraging a company's already built-in infrastructure. Since these panels were built, companies have invested lots of money in their IT infrastructure. They've built out racks, they put in servers, they put in APC units, battery backup units for these racks. And so instead of having every 8 doors having to have that infrastructure built into each one of the panels, we're now leveraging all of that infrastructure that the customer already has built in place, and we're using it out of a simple Power over Ethernet. The other advantage that this has from a hardware standpoint is that it's just dead simple. It really only has 3 connectors on it. You put a reader into it, you put a PoE into it, and you put the lock off of this one connector here. And guess what? You're installed and up and running, versus some of the legacy stuff, which are a bit more complex to install and configure. So that's the hardware benefit. I'm going to now share my screen, and then we'll take a quick look at the software side. And then what we'll do there, we'll talk a little bit about what the software advantages are for the product. So hopefully you can see my screen now. I made my videos just a little smaller on the side, but that's okay, because I'll show you me running some of the cards across the reader. So that's me walking into the door, and you see how quick that is. Basically, I'm getting access grants over here on my event monitor, so I can see who's coming through the door. I've run a few more through just to kind of give you an idea of how quick and reliable this thing is. This is what a typical access control solution would do. The advantage of this from a software standpoint is that I only really need to have one set of software that I manage both my complete head-end software infrastructure and my controllers. There's very little firmware in the small controller here. All it's doing is passing what it gets from the reader up to the head-end software. The head-end software is the one where all of the intelligence is. This is where we can program it to do complex access control logic. It can do man traps and door groups and threat levels, all of those things. Instead of having to be in a complex piece of machinery that goes out to every single set of 8 doors, it can now reside in a head end. A simple update of one piece of software takes care of all your clients, it takes care of your server, and it takes care of all your firmware updates to the panel, because there is no firmware updates to the panel. So it's simple for the dealer to install. It's quick for the dealer to install, so the dealers now can get stuff up and running very quickly. They can make more money on their projects. We can make products very inexpensively, where we maintain those same high margins on this product as we do with this product. It's simple to replace. If we have any issues with this, it's just a case of pulling out an Ethernet port and swapping out a pluggable reader cable, and now we can replace product if we need to. And it all updates to a very complex and easy to get to user interface in the cloud. I'm going to pop to one other screen here. I won't belabor it too much, but just give you an idea of where Freedom is at. So Freedom is the head end that's managing all of these encrypted bridges. It has a very nice user interface. It's very user friendly because it's been developed here in the last few years rather than 20 years ago. I want to show you the graphics package. We have integrated video. This is our 3VR platform. These are employees that we've got up in our Vancouver office that you'll see in real time right now. I've got my channel 2 video hooked up to my door, so if I float over the top of my door, you can actually focus in on specific cameras. I can also manage the reader as well right from the user interface. If I come over to here and momentarily unlock the door for 5 seconds, you're going to see that the door unlocked over here on the controller, and you can see how quick and easy it is to manage this hardware. So definitely a next level of evolution for access control, less expensive, easier to install, quicker to install and cheaper to install, and a great way to deploy software. I'll hand that back right over to Charlie for any questions.
Great, thank you, Mark. So at this point, we've got a few minutes. We're going to open it up to Q&A for a little bit. Just as a reminder, if you do have a question, please submit it to the Q&A portal. And while questions are coming in, we're going to start with one that was submitted in advance by an investor. So Steve or Mark, I guess this could be for either of you, but this relates to Apple and some of their developments as of late. So last week, Apple announced MagSafe products, which as I understand it, are fast chargers and accessories that utilize an NFC antenna to authenticate the attachment that's being used to charge your iPhone. Can you explain a little bit about how the technology works and how that adoption of it may open up incremental use cases for NFC?
Sure, I'll take that. So first, of course, I don't want to speak overly for Apple, but from a technology perspective, what they've done, it's actually core to their strategy. There have been a number of analysts that have said price per unit is capping out and gross margins are under pressure, and they've got to figure out ways to get more gross margin dollars and revenues per phone. And so obviously peripherals and connected peripherals are core to that. And I think that's where their strategy is coming from. From a technology perspective, it's really beautiful what they've done. The magnetic connection is, super clean and super reliable, and therefore they can then take an NFC device, make sure it's closely linked to the phone. They can also ensure that peripheral, whatever it might be, they're using it for charging, but there's a number of other peripherals coming out there, everything from cases that can show your calendar on the back of them, that might have other sensors on them, that might have other capabilities, whether it's accelerometers or temperature or something else. They then can ensure that is an Apple certified peripheral. Even if it's not from them, they can license the devices to authenticate to all the other peripherals. As Apple loves to do, they can take a tax on that as well. But then they're also making sure that it's that seamless Apple experience that you're going to get with that peripheral. So the consumer gets a whole range of capabilities. They also get capabilities that are tightly integrated and certain to work. Apple, of course, gets another revenue stream on top of it. And NFC is really core to the technology that's enabling some of that interaction.
Great, thank you. Was there anything regarding around the NFC capabilities that surprised you as it relates to the new iPhone?
No, it's always surprising when Apple opens broadly, and they really have opened the NFC data formats and the NFC experience very consistent with the standard. But what, of course, they did on the back of that was they added the whole MagSafe platform, which will involve proprietary technology, and they can issue the security license keys that go along with that. So something like that would go into something like our devices, and then that would authenticate that it's an Apple issued and licensed device. So it really didn't surprise me. For once, it didn't disappoint, which Apple again and again, because they've always been a little bit halfway in. They've really gone all in, whether it's with app clips or with MagSafe, or with some of the other things that they're likely to be coming out with. They seem to have decided this is part of the use case that's going to expand the revenue and margin opportunity for the iPhone platform as iTunes start to plateau out, as apps start to plateau out, and as prices on the phones themselves start to plateau out.
Excellent, thanks, Steve. Sort of a clarifying question. Did you say the question is? Did you say that there were 4.5 billion prescriptions per year in the US? Was that the correct number?
Yes.
Okay. And do you have a sense of how many of those CVS or what CVS's penetration is relative to other players?
I don't, and that's a good point to validate. Any of these companies I'm mentioning, I want to be very clear. We are never allowed to disclose our customers, and so that none of these are necessarily our customers, and so I don't know exactly CBS's share there. But from that experience and from my own knowledge in the visually impaired market, once someone moves that way, it'll be very hard for competitors not to offer the same thing to the visually impaired. Otherwise, you're going to move your prescriptions over there, and that's the last thing that Walgreens or Eckert's or anybody else or Walmart wants to have happen. But I don't know CVS's share per se.
Got it. This will probably be the last one, just because we're running up on the 30-minute mark, and we want to be conscientious of everyone's time. You've spoken that some of these RFID opportunities, they could be in the billions of units potentially. Should that be the case, and this would be a good problem to have, but I would expect that meeting the demand of those orders could be a bit of a challenge. Can you talk about what Identiv is doing to basically be able to meet the demand of RFID over the coming months or years?
Yeah, good question. And as we've already disclosed, we'll be dealing with double the demand in the last half of this year versus last year. So we already have scaled up substantially, and in fact, even as we speak, we're physically expanding our space in our main production facility in Singapore, adding equipment, et cetera. But to add what will nearly double the capacity there. It's a couple $100,000 in build out, and $1 million-ish of equipment, which is also typically financed. So it's not even a cash hit there. So it is a lot of work. And frankly, it's more so a matter of work and planning. So we can keep producing, obviously, at rapid rates and expand our capacity. But it's much less so a matter of capital investment in order to support it.
Okay, understood. I think that's unfortunately all the time we have for the moment. So I think we're going to wrap things up just for today. I know there were a couple questions that came in at the end there that we didn't have time to get to. So if you do have any follow-up questions, please feel free to submit them to us. This is our contact info, and we're happy to help where we can. But in the meantime, I'd like to thank everyone for their time and joining us today. And special thanks to Mark and Steve for taking the time to walk us through the product demos and answer some questions. So with that, we're going to close things, and I hope everyone has a great rest of the day.
All right. Thanks, Charlie. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.